for a while to do some interviews with some people, interesting people, and so it's a bit like a podcast. So the only issue is that I'm a bit too lazy to actually create such a thing. Seems like too much like hard work, too much equipment to purchase, and I might only do one episode. I've come up with an idea, and I'm going to just record some conversations, which I'll be calling Wineglass conversations, because I'm just going to sit down with somebody, we're going to have a glass of wine, and we're going to have a chat, and basically see how the conversation takes us. And this is my first one. So I've got Jonny Hughes, who's a winemaker from Tasmania, as my first guest, and I hope you enjoy it. So from here on in, there won't be any more videos, it'll just be sound, so put your earplugs in, and hope you enjoy it. So welcome to my first episode of what I'm going to call Wineglass Conversations, and I'm here with my first guest today, which is a local winemaker, Jonny Hughes from Mewstone Wines. Now Johnny's had a pretty amazing emotional ride over the last 18 months or so, which started by being awarded the Best New Winery in Australia by James Halliday in August of 2018 actually, and then last September Jonny was awarded the Gourmet Traveller Young Australian Winemaker of the Year. So he's had a remarkable rise from a relatively new business. And then in between all that, we had some massive bushfires in southern Tasmania last year, which resulted in Jonny losing some vintage in his Mewstone vineyard through smoke taint. So as I said, it's a pretty emotional ride. So thank you, Jonny, for volunteering to be the first victim of my Wineglass Conversations.
It's a pleasure, Joe. Pleasure.
And so for you, it's been, a period of very high highs and some low lows.
Yeah, 2019 is not a year that I necessarily would like to repeat anytime soon. But as you say, there was some massive highs in it. But when it starts with fires that take away all the red fruit from your vineyard, then I guess it's never going to be a great year, and a pretty stressful year. We learn a lot, I think, as an industry, as an individual, we learn a lot about something that will affect us long into the future. Fires are probably one of the highest risk hazards that we're going to have going forward, I think. So we have to learn more about them, and the only way to learn about them is to experience them. So you got to take that out of it as well.
I mean, it's obviously been pretty topical, the fires, this year. And, I guess me personally, through Instagram, we've had heaps and heaps of support from people all over the world. It's been all over the news. So what's sort of, have you got any personal relationships with someone who's been badly affected?
This year it's been probably, I guess, some people that I've met over the last couple of years, and you go, oh. So young Turon up in the Adelaide Hills, who I've met at a couple of the functions over the last 2 years, and so you go out and have a coffee with him before a wine tasting, and then the next thing you do is see an Instagram post that has a vineyard burn out and a winery just saved from the fires, and you think, wow, it hits pretty close to home. I guess from our point of view, it hit so close to our home last year, and we had friends on the water pumps waiting for the ember attacks down at Glazier's Bay and things that I guess we have a slightly different relationship with it than maybe the people who didn't quite appreciate what happened in Tasmania last year. And I think there's a large part of the Australian wine community particularly that maybe the scale of it was considerably less, and the fires themselves didn't really affect the broader Australian community. That the reaction to the fires last year was very different probably to the reaction this year, because the scale this year is just so incredibly large and affecting so many producers
Yeah, in so many different states.
across the 3 states, and potentially, and who knows what'll happen. We're still not there yet, and that's the only other thing we sort of say has affected a lot in conversation at the moment. There's a few weeks, a few months to go yet. So,
and there'll be a lot of producers who won't know whether the smoke's affected their grapes as yet.
Yeah, I can imagine in plenty of those areas, and how it affects you is the other thing we learnt last year. So for us, we had significant smoke effect, but the reality of that was that we could produce whites, but we couldn't produce reds. And so that's something we learnt, and the only way we knew that was to pick the grapes, make the wine, take all the precautions we could by whole bunch pressing and taking less juice per tonne, if you like. So even though we did make some Chardonnay and Riesling last year, we've probably made 10-20% less than we would have in any other year, because we just we left a lot of juice in the press just in case, just to be safe. We took a lot of cuts and things just to ferment it out and see how it appeared after we'd processed it, and then we were able to make some wine. So and we had growers for Hughes and Hughes that were affected. So last year the scale of effect is the other thing about smoky years. It's not a you aren't.
Yeah.
There are a few that absolutely are or absolutely aren't. There are those two extremes, but then there's everyone in the middle, which is a whole lot of people which might or might not, might get red, might not.
Yeah.
Might be able to downgrade wine and compromise their winemaking to make sure it's not smoke tainted, but maybe don't get quite as good a wine or quite the wine they wanted to make. So yeah, I think there's a whole lot of that other as well, and I think that's what the whole industry is going to be working through over the next 6-12 months yet again, which is a little bit scary. So
do the vines recover from smoke taint the following year?
as far as I'm aware, there's absolutely no. The vine is unaffected by smoke. In terms of it is the current crop that will be affected. Obviously, the fires going on where they've actually had fires in vineyards are a very different story. They'll have different results, but smoke itself, where it's just smoke, it affects the current crop that's on the vine, and then as far as we know, as far as I know, I should say, all good. There's no sort of consequence to vine health that we've seen, and we certainly haven't seen any in our vineyard. We had a reasonable amount of smoke, and speaking to other guys in our region that were affected by smoke more heavily than us, I don't know that no one's expressed any fears or worries about how their vines have performed this year or how they think the crop's going to perform. Quite the opposite, we seem to be having quite a good season. So yeah.
Actually, I was going to lead into that next, as obviously we're in February. We've just hit February the 3rd today.
Yeah.
And vintage isn't too far away. So vintage is the wines are looking good, or the vines are looking good. The grapes, the fruit.
Yeah, we're looking at I would say we're certainly not going to have an early vintage. We had a bit of a slow start. Things have picked up a little bit over the last few weeks, but flowering wasn't brilliant in Tasmania as a
very cold spring, didn't we? In relative terms. And
when we had a very windy season up until probably the middle of December, we suffered a lot of wind, and a lot of that was probably fairly cold wind. So a lot of canopies really struggled to get away in the early part of the season. Certainly the earlier flowering periods were affected by the wind in a negative way. So I think what we're probably seeing, not across all vineyards and not across all varieties, is we're hearing a lot about in the Yarra as well, but the hen and chicken, so just smaller bunch weights, lots of bunches, but they're just not very big bunches. So all in all, from what I've heard, I would guess we're looking at we're certainly a moderate vintage in terms of yield. Yeah, and quality, I guess, is always a little bit hard to guess at this early stage, but at the moment you'd still be holding out pretty high hopes. We've got the amount of fruit we're going to get and the state of the canopies now, which have recovered quite well, and the bunch structures and things. You feel like there could be some pretty good wines out there, and the season's been since mid-December. I'd say the season's been pretty good. We've had a couple of extreme days, but only a couple, and we'll wait and see how it plays out over the next 6 weeks. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember looking back at 2017. I saw a few vineyards, and there were lots of chicken and hens.
Yep.
Back in 17, and a lot of the 17 wines turned out to be pretty fabulous. So, and I think I remember 17 was also a cool start to the year. So
A genuinely cool vintage 17, and for me, there's
late ripening.
yes. So the later the season, and for me personally, I tend to look back at the later vintages, particularly as I guess the average vintage gets earlier. The later ones tend to stand out as very pretty sort of vintages, where I guess we get that longer ripening season, so we get more flavour intensity into our wines. We get really good acid structures. So for me, at the moment, the later the season pushes, it doesn't make me nervous in any way, shape or form. There's no disease pressure that I've heard about. Everyone seems to have got through that. From that respect, everyone's going quite well. So what you would hope is that the season will produce potentially a later season, but with great flavour, with really good acid. If we don't get too many extreme days, and I think we had our first warm night that I can remember on the weekend, and then the next night it drops down to 9 degrees the next night, and we're down into single digits, and it almost feels like winter this morning. So the vines get a chance to recover pretty quickly, and I don't think we'll be shedding acid and things like that yet anyway. So I think all in all, if we just get a nice moderate finish to the season, at the moment, like I say, good canopies, moderate small bunches, and a reasonable amount, it should be a pretty good vintage, I think.
Should be interesting. So tell us a little bit about your wines. You've got two labels. You've got the Mewstone label, and the Hughes and Hughes label. Tell us the difference between the two.
So we made it pretty simple at the start. So Mewstone was the start of the project for us, which was planting our own vineyard down in Flower Pot. So anything that goes under the Mewstone label is all grown at Flower Pot on the vineyard. And as we started to produce our very first Mewstone wine in 2016, we decided to basically create a job for me. So to do that, we needed basically the business to be a little bit bigger than what our little 2 hectare vineyard was ever going to be capable of providing. So we decided to purchase some fruit, and that purchased fruit from other growers around Tasmania always goes into the Hughes and Hughes label. So it's for me, I like the notion of single vineyard wines being single vineyard wines, as in Mewstone is the name of the vineyard, and therefore only Mewstone fruit can go into Mewstone. I think for Hughes and Hughes, we certainly will make single vineyard wines, because we really like the expression that you can find in finding little parcels of fruit from different parts of Tasmania and expressing them in the bottle. So we'll absolutely always do single vineyard wines within Hughes and Hughes, but it won't be our own fruit. It will be from friends that are growing it for us. So that's sort of a very easy way to explain the difference between the two labels.
And so the actually I was looking at, and I haven't tried the wine yet, and you haven't brought one with you either, I don't think. You've made a Dornfelder.
We have, yeah. So this is and there's the silver linings that come from a difficult season such as 2019. Alain Rousseau out at Frogmore, I was getting some fruit off in having lost more than a couple of growers had lost some fruit as well, and so you threw out the SOS to everyone and said, has anyone got something to sell me? And Alain, apart from finding some fruit out of their vineyard at Roslyn for us, also put us on to Phil Dolan up at White Rock Vineyard in the northwest of Tasmania, which is one of the closer vineyards to where I spent the first 18 years of my life. So they have probably the largest planting that I know of Dornfelder in Australia. I really can't imagine anyone else has got a hectare of Dornfelder. So,
I haven't seen many around.
I'm pretty confident we're, as of 2019, the largest Dornfelder producer in Australia.
Hard to believe that we could have the largest producer of anything in Tasmania.
Exactly. So we went and had a quick look at a barrel sample and some wines that White Rock had previously made of Dornfelder. It was all a pretty hectic time, and we looked at the wine and went, oh, that's really can make another interesting red for us other than Pinot. And it struck us as a really fun opportunity, and classic Hughes and Hughes by nature of there's an opportunity, let's just go with it and we'll figure it out afterwards. So that's exactly what we did, and we're still figuring it out, to be honest. But it's made a really aromatic red. It looks big, it looks like it's going to be a big red in the classical Australian sense, and then you drink it and go, well, actually it's kind of medium bodied, it's got really good acid, its pH is quite low. Yes, it's dark, it's absolutely the darkest red that I've ever seen and I've ever worked with, and I include anything grown anywhere that I've worked with on the mainland.
So even darker than Cabernet or?
Oh, much darker. Yeah. With I think Lagrange and what's the other one? The Russian Saperavi sort of territory. So we're talking.
Saperavi I've never had. Lagrange I've had, and that's a big wine.
Yeah, but instantly staining. Don't drop it on the carpet, sort of wine. It's not coming out. It stains your glass. It stains the actual bottle. We've found, like, so the top of the wine bottle, up around the neck of the bottle, actually is stained by the wine.
So it's all right in your stomach, though.
Oh, absolutely fine. It's just got an incredible amount of colour in it. And
you just need to brush your teeth for 3 days afterwards, I suppose.
Yeah, it's one. Oh, it's pretty remarkable, but really aromatic and really changes in bottle too. So the fun thing about it is it goes from this very fruit-driven sort of wine with lots of sort of blackberries on day one and little hints of anise and little hints of spice, to those elements of the spice and the anise dominating by day two, and sort of almost a thyme, like a fresh thyme sort of character coming through after the bottle's been open for a day or so. So I find that really interesting with any wine that can evolve like that in bottle. And this year we've got a couple of big sort of different ideas. So we'll probably make a lot of it into, it has really good acid, so we'll make a lot into pet nat this year. So we're going to do a second pet nat that'll basically be the colour of a Tassie Pinot.
Yeah.
But obviously without the tannin, because the one thing about Dornfelder is even whole bunch pressed, the colour is almost a Pinot. So you can't make a light coloured Dornfelder even if you press it straight off. So we're going to take that as an opportunity and say, well, let's make a really funky coloured pet nat that you really could make with very few varieties. It won't have overt phenolics. It will have great acid, because the acid on the Dornfelder is fantastic. Even post Malo, last year ours came back at 3.45 or something, which is right at the bottom end of any reds I've ever worked with for natural acidity. So yeah, this year we're going to make
it's coming for 2020.
Yeah, so that's our sort of. If I don't stuff it up, it's coming in 2020.
I'm sure you won't stuff that up. So pet nat, with the process of making that, when would you anticipate releasing that?
Probably June, July. We sort of, as with all Hughes and Hughes, we're not fearful of, I guess, getting to market quickly with our wines. We want to preserve that fruit, that crunchiness, that vibrancy, and I think that applies even more so to our couple of little no sulphur wines that we'll do, which are the pet nat and a little red. Part of that is getting to market quickly, allowing people just to enjoy it as a young, fresh wine. Fingers crossed, last year we trialled it and we did our first little pet nat, and it didn't go close to making it to summer. We didn't realise, one, that the market was there, and two, I guess if you make something tasty then people will just drink it because it's so fun to drink, that we didn't realise that we could have made a lot more, obviously. So this year we're going to try and make a lot more. So make a decent amount, so actually more people can get to try it.
Yeah, that would
be nice.
Rather fascinating. Now you've also planted some Shiraz. So what sort of future do you see for Shiraz? Are you obviously keen on it?
Yeah, well, we should be adding that to our Hughes and Hughes label this year too. So we found a grower that's got some Shiraz for us. So for me, personally, it's been one of my favourite varieties in Tasmania for as long as I can remember. So I still remember drinking the 2005 St Matthias Syrah way back when, and just thinking, wow, that is a really good wine. There is just really good in every sense. Like, it had great acid, it's got great tannin, it's got great colour, it's and the flavours are just so pretty and so lovely.
So that's from the Tamer.
That was from the Tamer.
Is the Tamer, do you think, the region for Shiraz still, or is it?
No, I think it's
Coal River Valley.
I think it's pretty universal. I think you could actually. I don't think there's a region in Tasmania that I've seen that you couldn't grow Shiraz and make a good wine. It's one of those. For me, it's a fairly universal Tasmanian grape. We're growing it obviously in the Dornfelder Channel, which is probably one of the colder regions in Tasmania.
Yep.
And for me, the coldest year in 2017 has so far produced probably my favourite of the 3 vintages we've got to make. Obviously, we missed out on 19, but the fruit in 19, I must say, a little bit almost the most devastating moment of vintage when you realise that was smoke affected.
Yeah.
We had our biggest crop ever, and it got right without a problem in the middle of April, and we made some rosé from it, which just had a little bit of an effect, so we couldn't use it. So some of that's coming in a vermouth, if I can figure out how to make vermouth. But certainly for me, Shiraz has an undeniable future in Tasmania. I think a lot of other reds do, to be honest. I think Pinot, quite rightly, holds the position as number one, and I can't see a time in the near future or even the medium future that isn't the case. I think Pinot is
I think it's got
the king of Tasmania.
It'll be on the world stage, won't it? I think.
Absolutely.
Tasmanian Pinot.
I think Pinot in Tassie has, that is just, you shouldn't be planting Shiraz because you're not planting at the sacrifice of Pinot, I think. But when you say, I'm planting this Pinot, and as we did a little side project in Shiraz, I think makes a lot of sense. And there's other varieties that we could do, but for me, Shiraz is certainly, was the most exciting other variety to plant on our property. And if I looked back on that decision, I wouldn't have changed it to the extent that we've planted more grapes and we've planted more Shiraz in that new planting as well. So we haven't stepped away from our Shiraz, we've stepped into it. So that probably says enough, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've won some awards recently. I know you don't sort of probably want to dwell on those too much, but winning the best new winery of the year and the best young winemaker of the year. What sort of effect does that have on your business? Those sort of accolades.
I guess they're kind of hard to quantify for us because we don't know of a world in which we didn't win those awards, but at the same time, I think we can safely say they've had a very positive effect on the business. They've allowed us to get our wines out to a broader audience in a much shorter space of time than we otherwise would have.
So how long have you been actually in business?
So 2016 was our first vintage. So I guess in September of 2016, I had all the local boys and girls of Hospitality Hobart around to my place to launch the brand in the backyard with a barbecue. So that was September of 2016, and so I don't know how long ago. That's 3.5 years, is it? Is that right? 3.5
years ago.
So it hasn't been long for us. It's been a quick ride. I mean, we planted our vineyard in 2011, so that's when it all started. But it all has coalesced since 2016. That was when we started with a product that we could actually start to show people. We didn't release Mewstone until 2017, so Mewstone hasn't been even 3 years in the market yet, because those wines just took a little bit longer before we wanted to take them to market. So the awards, I've got no doubt that the awards make a massive difference, and you gleefully accept the awards. They don't change your approach, they don't change the way what you want to do, but it's great to get a pat on the back and get the recognition and seem like an overnight success, like the cliche of someone who's been in the industry for 20 years by the time they get that overnight success. But I think the wines themselves have obviously had a good reception, and I think those awards come partly because the people who are reviewing wines and seeing wines and putting your wines forward in the broader sense are appreciating it and talking positively about it.
Very much so.
And I think within the industry, that's if no awards came, but we had that positive feedback, we'd still be going well, because it really helps when people who know what they're looking at and know what they're tasting are saying, I like this wine, and that allows other people to approach it with some confidence. I think that's the biggest part of that. It allows us to approach the next season with some confidence too. So when you came off the holiday, we could then look at the next season and go, you know what, we can afford to go out and buy that extra parcel of fruit, or experiment with that other idea that we had in our head, because we feel like there will be a market there for it. So you could attack it with a little bit more positivity and probably a slightly better cash flow too. So that always helps a young business. So you can go out and have a bit more fun with it, because there's enough backing there, there's enough momentum sort of generated that you can take a bit more confidence going forward. So.
Excellent. So you're a Tasmanian boy. I mean, I remember we go back a long way. There was a time when we were both wine reps on the road, and you decided to take a different path and go into the winemaking scene. So when did you sort of decide that was what you wanted to do, and that eventually you wanted your own vineyards and winery?
Well, I guess it started for me. So I did a normal economics degree back in the day down in Hobart, and after that sort of did an office job, decided that really wasn't the path I was willing to travel. So that was when I went back and studied, this is back in the early 2000s, went back and studied in New Zealand at Lincoln and did a postgrad diploma in winemaking and viticulture. So I guess for me, that's when the journey started. And at the time, I didn't know if I wanted to be a winemaker. I just really liked wine. I enjoyed wine. I felt like the industry and the people I'd met within that industry, and I hadn't met a lot back then, but they just all seemed like good folks. And so I went back and sort of when I look back at my decision to get through the postgrad, it's a surprise decision, let's say. There wasn't anything in the family. There was no history. I certainly wasn't a connoisseur, and I had people around me, even at 20, 21, that knew a lot more about wine than I already did. But it was just a bit of a gut feel that it would be a good decision down the track. So that was sort of what kicked it all off. And then I just did the normal work, lots of vintages, worked in vineyards though as well. And that's what led me to selling wine as a wholesaler. I worked in a wine bar for a couple of years. I worked as a wholesaler for a couple of years, with the attitude that if you're going to be in a business, you need to know the whole business. To be a successful winemaker, I think it's helped me in the sense that you have a better understanding of what the people who are going to buy your wine and drink your wine, either the guys running the bar or the guys sitting at home on their couch on a Friday night. You've had those conversations with them more times, so you sort of can understand them. When they're giving you the feedback, you can hear it a little bit more clearly.
And you've been there, and you know their pressures and their
absolutely
and their market pressures, their business pressures,
and it feeds back into every decision we've made about how we've structured our business. So it's not just how we've made our wine, which has an influence, but how you make your wine, I guess, will always be a slightly more personal choice for every winemaker. I think how you market your wine and how you price your wine and how you present your wine to the world has to be more of an idea that's influenced by all of those notions and those conversations you've had along the way. And so for me, I was lucky enough to have a lot of those conversations over sort of about 10 years, in the end of 10, 15 years of dealing with people at every spectre of the wine industry, be it from the guy planting the grapes to the guy drinking the glass of wine on their couch on a Friday night, and everyone in between. I'd had a lot of those conversations with a lot of those people, and I've got no doubt that has helped Mewstone and Hughes & Hughes step off on the right foot, because I've allowed all of those influences or ideas to have an influence on what we've wanted to do.
Yeah, because I mean, selling wine is, I mean, most people might not realise this, but selling wine is tough.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of wine out there, and it's really hard to sell wine. You know, there are a lot of good wines out there that probably don't sell because for one reason or another they can't get a foot in the door with a buyer, or for many different reasons.
And I think that's the same in any beverage industry, in any sort of, I guess, food and hospitality industry. It's one thing to present a good product or to have a good product. It's another thing to to get the recognition for it, or to get people actually excited about it and wanting to come and see it. And the world's changing in that sense so quickly that social media and other things are having an influence that they didn't have when we started out. So the importance of wine rosin and things, it's not diminished, but it's a broader church now. So I think all those things, though, yes, selling wine is probably the toughest part of the industry. Like you say, it's actually, I shouldn't say it's not hard to make wine, but it's not that hard. I mean, there's a lot of people out there.
Well, it's not that hard to sell wine either, but
no, there's a lot of people out there who have.
Mathematically, everything's quite easy.
I'd say there's a lot of really good winemakers out there, and like you say, there's plenty of them that haven't had the ability to actually, either the opportunity to make it, which I got partly through my brother deciding that his retirement plan would be a vineyard. I mean, that's what gave me the opportunity to actually have my own fruit and help plant a vineyard and help do those things off my own bat. It's a very, capital intensive industry to grow your own fruit, and that opportunity, I dare say, would not have come my way, where I couldn't have done it right on my own, under my own steam. Like I didn't have any land, I didn't have any money. So putting my own vineyard in would have been a really, really long and hard road, and instead having the ability to have a family member who said, "Oh, this is what I want to do for the second phase of my life. Should we do that?"
So your brother's older?
Yeah, so it's the oldest of four boys is Matthew, and I'm the youngest of the four, and he was working in Sydney and decided that was not something he wanted to keep doing. So the idea to leave Sydney, move back to Tasmania, and for him that meant moving back to Tasmania was always going to mean leaving his work, and his work wasn't something that he, I think, ever saw himself doing till he was old and grey. So for him, this was the second phase of his life, if you like. So for him, he's a fully active member. He does lots of vineyard work, lots of warehouse work, lots of all the admin I don't have to worry about too much anymore, which is fantastic. Which allows us just to focus on our strengths. So Matt can focus on running the business, and I can focus on making wine and selling the booze. And so it's a very happy partnership in terms of strengths and weaknesses, but a pretty unique one, I think.
One that works really well. And so we've got our wine here now, which is what have we got?
We've got the brand new little release for Hughes & Hughes, which is a 25% whole bunch Pinot, which is from a little vineyard in the Tamar Valley, which I won't name. Came through a fruit swap. Basically, we swapped a couple of ton of fruit with Ricky Evans, 2 Ton Tasmania. So we found a couple of ton of southern fruit for Ricky to work with, and he found a couple of ton of northern fruit for us to work with. So this is one of the lovely things that happens in the wine industry for me, where the idea of a little fruit swap, so I could work with some of his fruit and he could work with some of our fruit, sort of came to be at I can't even remember when, probably a few beers after the Urban Wine Walk, I think it might have occurred.
Yeah, right.
So we took that fruit and we've done what felt right for me. So this is 25% whole bunch, as with all our Hughes & Hughes wines now, no yeast. This one was about probably 3 weeks on skins, pretty lightly. I don't do a lot of pumping over or punching down or any of that. I work the wines pretty hands off most of the time, and then this one we had a spare bit of oak lying around because we weren't making any Mewstone Red, so we had a few empty barrels. So this got a little bit more new oak than it would probably have got otherwise, because the fruit was strong enough. So this has ended up at probably 30 or 40% new wood because we didn't have any Mewstone to put in those barrels. So
just for a short period,
for about 8 months, 9 months. Yeah. So this has only just been bottled. So this is probably only 2 weeks, 3 weeks in bottle. So it's a little bit shy at the moment, but starting to come back together.
It's pretty. It's a beautiful drink. It's very pretty, very aromatic.
And I think that to me sums up the Tamar. Like for me, the Tamar has the idea of the 25% whole bunch is I often find the tannin is what you've really got to work and concentrate on with the Tamar for me. They're always pretty. They're always going to have lovely fruit. I don't think they ever struggle there. I think for me, the thing you have to be most aware of as a winemaker is probably the tannin structure of the wines out of the Tamar.
Yep.
And so that was the concept of the 25% whole bunch for me, was just bring that tannin forward, making it nice and firm. And like I say, and the fruit was intense enough and had the strength that putting some new oak on it for a period of time felt like that was a pretty safe bet too, because again, I think for me, oak works beautifully if the fruit's strong enough. And this fruit was sort of seemed strong enough, and so we decided to carry it through as a little single batch rather than blending it back into the main batch, which was always an option too, but it just sort of stood out on its own as a really good example for me of Tamar Valley Pinot. And part of the idea of the single vineyards when we do produce them for Hughes & Hughes will always be that the wine produced, for me, in my head, encapsulates what I hoped it would, be it the region or the vineyard. And so yeah, if we can say this is a good version, a good example of Tamar Valley Pinot, then it's worth bottling.
Yeah.
If it feels like a good wine, but it really, I couldn't place it as being from that vineyard or from that place, I would be tempted to let it back into the blend.
Yep.
Because I feel like, yeah, if you're going to do a single vineyard or those sort of wines, they really do need to emphasise place. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, it's interesting because something that I often talk about and write about is for Tasmanian wines is the regional differences. So we've got 7 different sub-regions in Tassie, and with all different characteristics. Whereas most people probably wouldn't know that because they see Tasmania as a single identity. So do you have like a favourite region where you like to play around with, and for what reason?
I guess for me, not surprisingly, and I think any winemaker who has a vineyard will probably say the same, is that typically your own region you planted for a reason.
Well, you wouldn't have been there in the first place.
You picked it for a reason, but certainly for
unless you inherited it, which you haven't.
No, I love fruit from the deep south, if you like. I think there's an intensity in the later vineyards I find really intriguing. So those where the back end of the ripening season, I think, are often really good. There's absolutely other vineyards though that float around that I think, if you had the opportunity to own some of those iconic vineyards around Tasmania, some of the old originals in the Lower Tamar, be it Steve Liviana's or the Marilla site, or someone like Claudio's up on the east coast. These are vineyards you'd love to play with their fruit, and you'd love to have a chance to experiment with their terroir as well. For me, there's a special place now, and we could only guess that we were picking a good site in the Don Tricasco channel, and it was a genuine guess, but in retrospect, looking back, it was a good guess, and we did well. We got the decision. From my point of view, the sort of fruit we're producing is fruit that I'm really enjoying working with, and I can't imagine now sort of not making it, and everything else gets put in perspective by the fruit that you're making, I guess. So when I look at other people's wines now, I kind of look through the Mewstone lens, and I think that's impossible to. We try and probably deny that we do that, but we all do it. It's just, how could you not? That's the fruit that you come to know and love, and it shades everything else that you do.
Yeah, the Huon Valley certainly, which is where you're.
The broader region, I guess,
region,
the Huon Channel sort of
has really come along in the last sort of 10 years or so, hasn't it? I guess sort of maybe Home Hill would be the most famous winery in that
I think Home Hill was the first one to sort of get up and running. Panorama back in the day had, Panorama at the end of the day in their heyday in the late 90s and things.
Elsewhere, I remember Elsewhere.
Elsewhere, they all sort of had little moments in the sun. I guess we didn't get the consistency down that way until Home Hill came along, and I think they provided a level of consistency. And then I guess they've now been joined by the likes of Sailor Seeks Horse and Jim Chatto, that are sort of really providing that next level of wow factor and consistency as well. I think part of the reason of that is that the vineyards of the Huon and the Channel are small, It's hard. It's not broadacre farming. We're not talking 50 hectare vineyards down there that can produce a big brand. We're talking, 2 and 5 and 10, and if you talk 20 hectares, I don't think there is one. I'm not sure. I don't think Terry's got anywhere near that. I don't think Panorama's that big. I don't think
I don't think so.
Sailor's only about
Home
7
Hill's
hectares.
probably the biggest one, wouldn't it be?
I would have thought, Panorama's probably an equivalent size. I think Panorama might be about 10, but this is small. Like, this is not, and so therefore, I guess that flows through into the brand recognition and what you see. And I guess that evolution in the wine drinking world, where people are looking for small and interesting things to try, as long as the quality's high, has allowed that sort of region to flourish, because people are willing to go out and search for Sailor or for Shadow or for Home Hill or for Newstone, for elsewhere. So some of these guys will, so the Hewing gets an opportunity to come back, because we always keep an eye out on what's around, and could you plant a vineyard there? Could you plant a vineyard there? And there's not many sites of any great size that you ever see. Like, they've probably got apple orchards on them if they do. So, but even then, the apple sites and the grape sites aren't necessarily quite the same. So, they'd be planting down in the bottom of the valley, and we'd probably be looking to plant just up off the fringes of it. So, it's I think in that sense it's really interesting. I don't think as a region, the Huon or the Channel, particularly the Channel, like, if you can find a 3 hectare site in the Channel, you're doing really well. So,
Right.
They're very small parcels of land. They're very small farms. It's very undulating country all the way south of Hobart. So finding places that have a significant sort of northern bank, if you like, can be quite challenging. And you're probably a little bit far south still to be planting too many southern banks. So aspect's really important. So it's challenging to find good sites, but when you do find good sites, they're really worth the effort, I think, down in the
So is aspect more important, or soil, or is it a bit of both?
I think it's a combination of all factors always. And I'm a bit of a classic for one, not knowing much about soil types.
Yeah,
I'm terrible.
I don't either.
But I also think for me it really comes down to the full package, and each site is going to be so unique, and so it's not necessarily that it's a bad site or a good site. Don't get me wrong, there is some great sites out there where, but even though they're a great site, they've still got to get the right things planted on them and be grown by the right people who look after them in the right way. And when you get all of those things right, then you get a great site, and the site suddenly looks magical. But I think if you took those people away and you took the right decisions away, and you made some poor decisions, or what turned out to be poor decisions, or had the wrong people doing it, you probably wouldn't ever realise it was a great site. I think Sailor Six Horse is a good example there. That vineyard got abandoned virtually straight after it got planted, and could have just been lost to history as just another. And instead, Paul and Gilly took it on, and they've made lots of great decisions, and now we'll remember that as a really good site.
Yeah.
But I think prior to them taking it on, I don't think many people would have seen it as a good site. I think most people would have walked past it.
You needed someone to believe in it.
You did, absolutely. You needed the vision, and they've got so much right about what they've done on that site. They've made, they're the right people to care for that site. So I think there's a bit of that. And so for me, soil types, yes, they're important, but they're important is how they're crafted into a wine that reflects their importance. I think if I'm growing wine on different sites, I'm going to make different wines from different sites. I think as long as you're prepared to do that, then you can make the most of the site you're on.
Yeah, very interesting. So just to finish off then, so we're probably going to have quite a few listeners all around the world, hopefully. When I put this up on Instagram, what do you see the strengths of Tasmania and the future? And one of the things that people that I get a lot of feedback is, especially international, they just can't find any Tasmanian wines. So do you see any future of growth and maybe Tasmanian wines becoming more prevalent around the world? And which varieties would they be?
I certainly think there'll be an expansion in the local industry, and once we get that, then we might have some volume to send it further around the world. I think certainly sparkling and Pinot will be the two styles that leave our shores in the greatest volume. I think Chardonnay will probably slide in there a little bit as well, but sparkling probably already has done that. I guess Pinot is the other.
Well, there's not many Pinot sites around the world that are making world-class Pinot.
And speaking to some of the guys, the boys from Alsace and places where there's a strong interest in planting some more Pinot. I think Pinot is a variety that has international relevance at the moment. There's not a lot of varieties that you could say that about. I think sparkling is another one that has international relevance and always has and always will have international relevance. And so if you can produce those sort of wines at a certain level of quality, which Tasmania does, then I think you'll instantly be able to take it around the world quite easily. I think for some of the other varieties that we grow here, they're not necessarily going to have quite the interest factor around the world. I think if you were looking for a Tasmanian wine in New York, the chances are the somms and the influencers would probably be looking to show you a Pinot or a sparkling or the like.
Or maybe our Chardonnay.
Or maybe our Chardonnay. And for me, I think there's a massive upside to Riesling, and we're massive fans of it, and we grow it, we make it, we buy it. And it will have a relevance, and I think that will continue to grow and continue to evolve, because I think the biggest thing that will affect Tasmania in its future will be obviously the climate. And for us, these genuinely cool climate varieties are something that the land masses around the world where you can grow them are shrinking, and that's concentrating it down to places like Tasmania where we can still do it, and in 10 years' time we'll still be doing it, where there's probably within Australia, I think you've seen varieties that made amazing sense in the 70s and the 80s that maybe don't make quite as much sense, or for me personally, they don't make as much sense anymore. And so we're seeing what have long been considered great wines that I think if they entered the marketplace today, I personally don't think they'd necessarily get that status. They've evolved with the time and with the climate, but I think if you were starting from scratch, it'd be a tougher gig, and I don't think they'd necessarily even be planted in some of those regions. So some of those warmer climates of Australia, I don't think you would see as much Riesling planted. I think you would have seen a lot more of the Mediterranean wines planted, and we're seeing that with the next generation of people planting Esoterico and Fiano and these sort of grape varieties.
Yeah, very much so.
Perfect sense in the climates in which they're growing. Yet the vines that were planted 80 years ago, they made perfect sense 80 years ago. So for Tasmania, I think the beauty is that we're at the front edge of our curve, and I've got no doubt that maybe not in my lifetime, but in the next generation, they'll have to start making decisions about what they're planting and what they're growing, and do they pull up an old vineyard and plant something new because the climate's moved past what we can grow. But certainly I think for the next 10 or 20 years, we're in a very lovely spot where we can grow fruit that's of an incredibly high quality in varieties that people really want to drink.
Which as you say, sparkling and Pinot probably at the forefront, and our climate being so dry is at the moment is we don't have disease issues.
We certainly, I think we've got lots of positives. We don't have, we can irrigate, which they can't in parts of the old world, which are making life pretty tough for some of the producers in places like France where they can't irrigate by legislation, and gee whiz, that'd be tough because they're getting pretty dry.
Every year, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and so so in these tough dry seasons, they have to sacrifice some quality, arguably, whereas we can go, oh, well, let's just sprinkle a little water on there, and that'll get them through. And I think the other thing, I don't think you're going to see a lot of our wines internationally though for a long time, because I think ultimately, or certainly I shouldn't say none of our wines, but we won't see a huge amount of the bits and pieces, because the quantities that Tasmania will produce in the grand scheme of things is tiny.
Yeah.
We're a tiny producing region, and we have an amazing support locally. A lot of people visiting our state, visiting our country, visiting Australia, that are interested in buying it on our shores. And I think it's a really positive thing to think that our wine should travel the least distance possible to get drunk. I think that's something to aspire to, and I know it probably make some international listeners sad, but I think in my time, drinking chocolate in San Sebastian or Barolo in Alba or some rosé in Provence, they were great experiences, and part of that was I was drinking the right wines in the right settings in their local community. And so the best way to enjoy Tasmanian wine is going to be to jump on a plane and come down to Tasmania and drink Tasmanian wines.
Well, that's right. Just come to Tasmania.
Yeah, that's all you have to do.
That's all you've got to do. You know.
Or go to Sydney. They love our wine in Sydney.
It'll only take a day. It'll only take a day out of your life to get here.
But I think that's genuinely the future of Tasmanian wine is going to be more and more local consumption. And
well, tourism is growing and growing, and the tourists love drinking our local wine as we do when we go travelling. We don't drink Tasmanian wine when we go to Italy, so
no.
So it's the same in reverse. Well, thank you, Johnny, for your time and insights.
Pleasure.
It's been great to have a chat and have a glass of Hughes and Hughes Pinot Noir at the same time. And hopefully our listeners have enjoyed the conversation. And if they do, then I've got to think about episode number 2.
Good luck with that, Joe.
Thanks a lot. See ya.